We're going to be going over adding integers using just numbers. So we're not going to use number lines. We're not going to draw pictures this time. We're just going to be using numbers. And again, the reason why we're going to do this is because sometimes you're going to get these giant numbers and you're not going to want to have to draw a number line or a picture with enough space for all of these big numbers. So this is adding integers that have different signs. So this is very similar to adding integers with the same sign, except this takes 3 steps. So the first step is to find the absolute value of both integers. Step 2, you subtract the smaller absolute value from the bigger absolute value. So you can see down below, we take the bigger number and we subtract the smaller number from it. And then step 3 is very similar to the last step that we went over in the other video. You're going to use the sign of the integer with the bigger absolute value. So the last step is always going to tell you what sign your answer should have. All right, so here's an example. I see that I am adding and my 2 integers have different signs because one of them is a positive number and the other one is a negative number. So remember, there's an invisible positive sign in front of that, and this is a negative number. All right. So step number 1 tells me that I need to find the absolute value of both of these numbers. So the absolute value of 5 is 5, and the absolute value of negative 12 is 12. Now I want to figure out which one of these has the bigger absolute value and which one has the smaller absolute value. So I can see that the 5 is smaller absolute value and the 12 is a bigger absolute value. So for step number 2, I want to put the bigger absolute value first and subtract the smaller absolute value, and that will give me 7. Now I'm not done yet. I know that 7 is going to be a part of my answer, but my last step tells me what sign I need to use. So I just need to make sure that my answer is correct. Is it positive 7 or is it negative 7? Number 3 says use the sign of the integer with the bigger absolute value. So I already know in step 2 that the integer with 12 as an absolute value was the one with the bigger absolute value. In the original problem, negative 12 was what we were working with. So that tells me that my answer also needs to be negative. And we got it from the number or the integer in the original problem that had the greater absolute value. So my answer is negative 7. All right, here's another example. I see that I'm adding. I also see that I have a negative number right here and a positive number right there. So I am adding integers with different signs. That means I need to follow my 3 steps. The first step is to find the absolute value. So I'm going to find the absolute value. I'm going to find the absolute value of negative 3. Which is 3. And then I'm going to find the absolute value of 7, which is 7. Now, which one of these is smaller and which one of these is bigger? The absolute value of 3 is the smaller one, and the absolute value of 7 is the bigger one. So when I move on to number 2, I know that I'm going to put 3 in the smaller box and 7 in the bigger box. And when I subtract 7 and 3, I get 4. All right, so I know my answer is going to have a 4 in it. I just have to decide whether it's going to be positive or negative. So step 3 tells me to use the sign of the integer with the bigger absolute value. Let's look at the original problem. The one with the bigger absolute value is the one that had the 7 as its absolute value. So in my original problem, that was a positive number. So my answer, if I wanted to put a little positive sign there, I could. I don't have to though. My answer is just positive 4. All right, one more example, and again, I'm going to use some bigger numbers here to, again, show you why we don't really want to have to rely on number lines so much, because I don't want to write a number line that has space for 342. That's just too much. So following these steps to just use numbers can be very helpful so that we don't have to spend all of our time drawing number lines. All right. So let's see, we want to find the absolute value. The absolute value of 342. It's a big number, but it's pretty easy to find the absolute value because it's just 342. And then the absolute value of negative 31 is just 31. Which one of these is bigger and which one of these is smaller? The bigger one is this one, 342. And the smaller one is 31. So I'm going to put them in the boxes where they belong. 342 is the bigger absolute value, and 31 is the smaller absolute value. Okay, so if I subtract those numbers, I'm going to get 311. So I know that my answer has 311 in it. I just have to see whether the answer is going to be positive or negative. So I'm going to look at which of these numbers had the biggest absolute value. That's the one with 342. And in the original problem, 342 was a positive number, which means my answer is also going to be a positive number. So my answer is positive 311, and I actually do not need to write this positive sign because we don't usually do that. So that's my answer, positive 311.